Being a home brewer, there are a lot of advantages. One of them is being able to brew any beer that I or the people around me want to drink. Recently I had my first black IPA and I loved the fruity but dark roasty notes that it offered, and I already had one IPA on tap and didn't want to have two, so look no further than the Tropical Stout. What's up everybody, Just Brewing here. I'm always looking to try new things when I'm brewing my beer, and one of the techniques I've been dying to try was pressure fermentation. To do something like this, you are going to need a pressure rated fermenter, and these can cost upwards of $100 and something. I don't feel like spending that money, so I fermented my beer in a Corny Keg. Outside of the pressure rated fermenter, you are going to need means of controlling the pressure, so a Spunding valve, and hopefully a jumper cable, which you can use for closed transfers. You don't have to have a jumper cable. You can serve from the fermenting keg. I would recommend transferring it if you can, or drinking the beer, or dispensing it, bottling it if you can, so that it doesn't sit on the tube for too long. There's a few things to consider when you're fermenting in a Corny Keg, and one of those things is volume. Your Corny Keg can fit about 5 gallons of beer inside, but remember that you're going to have some trub, so do consider brewing about 4 gallons or less if you're going to ferment inside this keg. And what good is any fermenter without beer? We're going to brew a Tropical Stout. Recipe in the description if you're looking for it, but we're going to go ahead and get started. I mash in with about 4.5 gallons at 149 for an hour. Since this is a stout, I'm going to go for a mash out at 168 for about 20 minutes. At the end of my 20-minute mash out, I yank my grains and get ready for a boil. With a pre-boil gravity of 1054, I keep moving on. At my boil, I throw in my first round of hops. I opt into using El Dorado. I just had some laying around, so I'm adding a few ounces of El Dorado during a flame out just for that tropical flavor, some of the pineapple and fruity notes that it has to offer. At the end of my boil, I start to cool it. I transfer it into my Corny Keg, pitch my yeast, and I bring it inside to get it ready for pressure. One of the things to consider when doing this is that trub layer is going to block your standard Corny Keg's dip tube. Some people will cut their dip tube. I did not have the tools for this, so I'm using a carbonated lid. These lids you can find on Amazon. I'll put the link in the description. Again, this is a carbonating lid, so usually there is an aeration stone on the bottom that would push very tiny CO2 bubbles into the beer so it could dissolve better. I just left that off so that I could use the negative pressure inside to push beer up and out when CO2 is forced into it. I'll show you what I mean later. Really, this is my means of closed transfer so I can get around cutting the bottom of my dip tube. For a better breakdown of the benefits of pressure fermentation, I'm going to link David Heath's video on it. It's absolutely amazing, and it's what got me into wanting to do it. So if you're looking for a better breakdown, feel free to check that out. But really, I'm doing it for a little bit of a faster process. You can actually take advantage of the CO2 that the yeast puts off and pre-carbonate the beer before you start serving it. And really what that means is saving time, and I'm big on that. So I wanted to give it a shot. I'm fermenting at 10 pounds of pressure. You do not want to go over 15 pounds, mostly because the yeast probably can't handle it, and it's just not worth it. I hook up my Spunding valve and I set it to 10 psi so that anything more than that gets pushed out into a small container of star sand that I have. I'm fermenting this at about 68 degrees for about a week and a half in hopes that this is going to be halfway carbonated by the time it's done fermenting. Fermenting under pressure can suppress some esters that yeast will try to put off during fermentation, so do select the right yeast when doing this. I wanted the El Dorado hops to shine here over any yeast esters that may have come out, so that's why I opted into it. So make sure to select the right yeast if you're going to do this. Next time I try this, I'm going to try it with a lager yeast at room temperature so that I can have a tried and true lager without having to lager it for those 2 weeks. I have tried the pseudo lager, but I may do a side-by-side pseudo lager versus real lager to see if you can taste the difference. On top of less time carbonating the beer, you can save a little bit in fermenting. I actually was able to ferment this in about 5 days on top of what would have been a week and a half or so. I did pitch a healthy starter, so that could have been the result, but I was able to save myself a little bit of time in fermentation and carbonation so that by the time I was setting up for a closed transfer, the beer was about 2/3 done. I did still carbonate at about 25 psi for a day and a half or so, and here is the result. I think it's a really good looking stout, and on the surface you can't really tell that it's a tropical stout, but once you start smelling it and getting the tropical pineapple, some of the other fruity flavors that El Dorado has, you can tell that this is not your ordinary stout. It is roasty and you still get some of that bitterness, a little bit of chocolate. Overall, I do think that the fruity flavors overpower the bitterness. There is a little bit there, but without it, you probably couldn't tell that this was a stout. Fermenting this beer in the Corny Keg was super easy, especially since I had most of the equipment on hand. All I had to order was that spunding valve and boom, I was able to ferment under pressure. If you have a Corny Keg, you also have a pressurized fermenter, so keep that in mind if you are looking to try new things and maybe save yourself a little bit of time in the future. Beers that are very sensitive to oxidation are going to be great to ferment under pressure. I know a tropical stout doesn't really count as something like a New England IPA or any of those other hoppy beers. I thought it went great. I mean, personally, I can't really tell any difference that it was fermented under pressure. It's still a really good beer and the flavors that I wanted to come out do. So I think this was a win. So, have you pressure fermented in a Corny Keg? Would you try it if you have a spare one laying around? Let me know in the comments. If you have a pressure fermenter, let me know what it is and let's see if it was worth it for you. That's gonna do it for me. Thanks for viewing, Just Brewing.